Good morning. Welcome to Seattle Atheist Church. Atheists, agnostics, our friends and allies, whatever you like to call yourself, you are welcome here. At Seattle Atheist Church, we call ourselves an atheist church because you will never hear anything supernatural promoted from the podium. So, our church is founded on the principles of scientific naturalism and secular ethics. Truth claims are attempted here, and we stand ready to revise our thinking in light of new information. We attempt to be excellent to all conscious beings, and we believe in good because good works in non-mysterious ways. If that sounds good to you, then you are probably in the right place. The one thing I would like to mention is that, are there board games today?
No.
No, sorry. No board games today. Okay.
Second Sunday.
Second Sunday of the month we have board games. So look forward to that next second Sunday. Sorry about that. And also, if you would like to support the church financially, usually there's a jar in the back where you can drop a donation. You can also do it off of meetup.com. And so the way we do it is our members give the talks, and then afterwards we have a discussion. I'm really looking forward to today's talk, so let me get out of here and let them get to it. Thank you. And please introduce yourselves however you like to.
Hello, everyone. I'm Mickey Phoenix. This is my wife, Eva Karlstrom, and we're doing a slightly different format today. Eva and I both have a lot of experience as panelists at NorwestCon, the Northwest Science Fiction Convention, and so we decided to present today's talk on the ethics of punching Nazis. Sorry, distracted there for a minute. On the ethics of punching Nazis as a panel discussion. I will be your moderator, and Eva will be our subject matter expert. Could you take a moment to introduce yourself?
You already introduced me then.
I introduced your name. I didn't introduce your...
I'm Eva Lise Karlstrom. I use she, her pronouns. I'm trained as a teacher. I don't know what is relevant introduction for this topic. I'm an anti-fascist.
I'm Mickey Phoenix. I use he, him pronouns. I've never actually punched a Nazi, but I have gotten face-to-face with some people who were doing biased and threatening actions and stopped them from doing so. So I have strong opinions on the matter. And let's start with just an opening statement. Eva, tell us about the ethics of punching Nazis.
There are times when it's the right thing to do.
Can you expand on that?
That is the sort of weak statement of my position. Obviously, you can get into more detail, which we will. I think it's important to start off with what we mean when we talk about punching Nazis. First of all, when I'm talking about punching Nazis, I'm not making a joke and I'm not speaking metaphorically. I'm talking about whether it is ethical or necessary or laudable to actually physically punch a Nazi. And what do we mean by Nazi?
So Eva wants to start with what do we mean by Nazi. I want to start with what do we mean by ethics. And Eva actually touched on that in her opening statement. She said, is it ethical? Is it laudable? And when we were discussing this earlier, she had this whole list of different degrees of, is it permissible? Is it laudable? Is it obligatory? Is it, etc.? I actually think that the question, is it okay to punch a Nazi, is really oversimplifying to not so much in the what's a Nazi, but in the what does okay mean? And I'm going to take the much stronger position. I'm going to start at the much stronger position of there are many occasions where it is morally obligatory to punch a Nazi, physically assault another human being. I think this is true.
And just to be clear, we're both mostly pacifists in the sense that we don't think it's a good idea to hurt people in general.
Oh, I think hurting people is a terrible idea. I also think that in a world that is as imperfect as this one, sometimes your choice is between a number of terrible ideas. We need to pick the least terrible or the one that has the most benefits. Quite frankly, a world where a private citizen is allowed to tower over another private citizen screaming you should be dead at them and the law won't interfere, that's a world where there aren't always happy, fuzzy rainbow choices available. And the problem is not, are we being the best, are we acting the best possible way? The problem is no one should be allowed to tower over someone else and scream threats at them and tell them they should be killed without legal consequences.
Or extra legal consequences, if the legal ones are not backing up the target.
Let me ask a question. Eva, if the government authorities actively and proactively protected people from intimidation and assault, actively stopped people from marching in mass with loaded weapons and surrounding a synagogue, actively took action to make it criminal to make public threats of violence, would you still think that there were situations where it was right to punch Nazis?
If there weren't fascists threatening people, anti-fascists would go play Pokemon Go and get stoned.
That.
One of the things, that's not my own quote, but I do like it a lot. There's some people out there are saying, well, this is a slippery slope. You know, if you say it's okay to punch Nazis, then you're going to go out and attack people who disagree with you, and you're going to just punch all the conservatives.
Everyone with a shaved head.
Historically, this is not what has happened. There have been a number of anti-fascist movements throughout history and throughout the world, starting before World War II and up to today. It's not a continuous movement. It's arisen at need and fallen away when it was no longer needed. Historically, when the fascists are no longer a threatening presence, the anti-fascists disperse. They don't stick around to punch someone else. So if that's what you're worried about, it's not what's been happening.
You know, we've heard a lot about the historical parallels between modern-day America and pre-World War II Nazi Germany. One thing that a lot of people don't realize, and I think it's worth mentioning here, is that the Nazis did not come to power in 1939 or 1940. They didn't get elected and build concentration camps and start a war. They got elected and ran the country for 10 years, slowly turning up the metaphorical pot under the helpless frog. So when people look for parallels between America and Nazi Germany, a lot of people are like, well, there aren't any concentration camps. Well, there weren't in Germany in 1931 either.
One of the things people sometimes say is, well, Hitler wasn't Hitler in 1931 either. He was just this guy. Seemed to have some pretty good ideas.
Yep.
So yeah, I think one of the major weapons of fascism is a shifting of the normal. And punching a Nazi is a counter weapon to that. There's an excellent, very important article by Jonathan Zunger called, what is it?
Who are Nazis?
What are Nazis and
how do we fight them? Why do we fight them and how?
I've got some references that I'll post on the church website. People want to follow up on the things that I've been reading. But this article, he lays out different stages in the presence of fascism in a society and what are useful ethical tactics at these different stages. One of the main points he makes is that in any society there are going to be 10%, give or take 5%, of people who are going to be heroes. They're going to do the right thing even if it costs them. And there are going to be 10%, give or take 5%, people who are going to be villains. They're going to be jerks just for the fun of it. And everybody else is mostly going to look around and see what normal is from the people around them. When fascism is a public presence of only about 10% or less, then when someone comes out and says something about how some category of people is less than human and should die, the appropriate social response to that is for people to immediately and soundly denounce them, mock them, tell them to shut up, or argue with them. All of these are perfectly viable approaches. But when it's more than about 15%, there's a shift, and it starts to seem like their arguments are normal, things you should talk about. They're out there in the world. It's normal.
lots of people think.
Lots of people think. People are saying, once enough people are saying it, you shouldn't engage them verbally, because that progresses the presence of these ideas.
I read a really interesting article a couple months ago on the fallacy of the truth is in the middle. Don't go to extremes. And it used gay marriage.
The truth is only in the middle if both the extremes are wrong and are evenly spaced from the truth.
That. And let's face it, both of the extremes are rarely wrong and rarely evenly distant from the truth. The example the article used was marriage equality. So we have one extreme, which is only straight people should be allowed to marry, and the other extreme, which is gay people should be allowed to marry. Wait a minute. The opposite extreme from only straight people should be allowed to marry is only gay people should be allowed to marry. Those straights have no business marrying each other. That's sick and perverted. How can a man and a woman touch each other that way? It's just wrong. That's the opposite extreme. And you know what's in the middle? That middle ground people want to find the truth in? Marry who you love. Don't try to tell other people who they can and can't marry. That is the compromise position. Right?
You marry who you like, I marry who I like.
Yeah. But by framing the discourse as gay people should not be allowed to marry at all, and everybody should be allowed to marry, by framing those as the extremes, well, maybe they should have civil unions, which are kind of like marriage. But that's not actually the compromise between the extremes. Nazism says people who don't have my skin color and cultural background should all be rounded up and killed. The opposite extreme position is people who wear a swastika or shave their heads should all be rounded up and killed. That's not the position we're advocating for. The middle position is, if you march around with guns saying you're going to kill people, we'll believe you. Think about that.
So, I think that the core point in whether it's okay to punch Nazis is when it is okay to punch people in general. When is it okay to punch someone?
Well, when I'm really pissed.
No.
You're right, that's not a good reason. But how about when they hurt me?
Yes.
Like, they punched me yesterday, so I punched them today?
No, it depends. Do you have other ways to keep them from punching you
Oh
today?
yeah, lots of them. I can call the police, I can avoid them, I can tell their dad can ground them, lots of stuff I can do.
If you can do all those things, you probably don't need to punch them.
But they punched me, shouldn't I punch them back?
I don't think that'll help. They'll probably punch you again, and then they'll get their friends to punch you.
I watched a 5-year-old last night. A 7-year-old. Whose 7-year-old sister had jumped on a mattress while he was under it and smacked his head on the floor. And he was, of course, in pain and very distressed, and came running out to get comforts. And I said, well, what would help? And he said, nothing will make it better except doing the same thing to her. And he attempted to go back into the bedroom, put her under the mattress, and stomp on her head.
We should try that on you.
This is wonderful 7-year-old logic, but it doesn't work so well for adult ethics. We learn better than that when we're, 7 and yeah. So yeah, vengeance, doing eye for an eye, that's not a good reason to punch Nazis.
Retribution is not a useful or ethical argument.
But I was thinking about this talk this morning and trying to sort of find my ground in metaphor, find the story that made it make sense to me.
It may be really satisfying to punch a Nazi because we like punching bad guys.
We do.
As a concept.
But, that's what we have movies like Indiana Jones for, is for the vicarious enjoyment of punching Nazis. That's not real life. But I was thinking about, I needed a framing, because I'm a very story-based person. I needed a metaphor or a framing that made the question of punching Nazis make sense to me. And I pictured a woman in her kitchen, by the sink, like this, while her husband smashes a plate on the wall next to her head and says, "What are you flinching for, bitch?" This happens, by the way, it's called domestic violence. But he didn't hit her. He didn't even threaten to hit her. He was reassuring. He said, "What are you flinching for?" This is domestic violence. It's illegal, actually.
That's a combination of implied hitting
and violence,
power over, and
property
gaslighting.
destruction, and gaslighting, yeah. And I realized, sorry, does anyone here not understand why that's wrong? Okay, good, we all agree that's wrong, right?
That woman has justifiable fear for her life.
If I am standing on the street in my rainbow sarong and my Black Lives Matter t-shirt, and 100 men in the same clothing, a uniform, all the same uniform, are walking down the street with assault rifles saying that I should die, I'm a lot more in the position of that woman by the sink than I am in the position of someone engaged in a calm and rational political debate. We
just want to talk about whether you should have the right to exist.
You only want to talk about me being dead?
Yes, why won't you engage in this conversation?
And the gun is just to...
Well, I have a right to open carry.
And the fact that you're standing 10 feet away from me and you have an assault rifle...
I have a right to be here.
And I should die, but wait, why are we talking about I should die?
That's my position.
Terrorism is defined as the use of fear to accomplish political ends. I am unable rightly to apprehend any other logical purpose for marching in groups of hundreds down a street carrying assault rifles while talking about genocide, other than attempting to use fear to accomplish political ends.
On the topic of free speech, we have limits on free speech.
We do.
Free speech is not an ultimate sacred thing that has no limits or exceptions.
You can't slander people. You can't shout fire in a crowded theater. You can't walk up to someone and say, I'm going to punch your face in. Did you know that it's actually a crime to say, I'm going to punch your face into someone? It's called assault. But it's oddly, is it somehow not a crime to say, we're going to kill all the Jews?
So, about the thing where if the police are protecting the targets.
Yeah.
If the police are lining the streets and separating the Nazis from potential targets as they march, which has happened in the past in a number of occasions, and the ACLU has defended the right of Nazis and the KKK to march, even through the neighborhoods occupied by Holocaust survivors. If the police are doing the job of protecting people from the threatened violence, then there is no need to punch the Nazis. If the police, however, are protecting the Nazis and not protecting their potential targets, and in fact turning their backs or helping when people protest the Nazis and then are being attacked, then someone needs to punch the Nazis. Doesn't have to be you.
But don't get in their way. You said someone needs to punch the Nazis. What good is accomplished by punching someone?
It stops them right now. That Nazi is now not punching someone else.
Fair.
They are not now threatening someone else.
Which is a crime, even if it's not treated like one.
They are now personally somewhat dissuaded from their path.
Yep.
They have found it painful. More importantly, their companions and bystanders have learned there is a cost to going out there and threatening people. They have learned they will not just be supported or silently watched or perhaps cheered on by the crowd, that anyone in the crowd may be someone who will come up and hit them for what they're doing.
Wasn't there an incident on a Seattle Transit bus a while back?
Well, yes. There was a case in which a man, who I don't think we ever learned the name of, was wearing a swastika armband. So when we talk about Nazis, we're not doing any kind of inference when we say someone's a Nazi today. We're talking about people who self-identify as Nazis or are displaying Nazi regalia and chanting Nazi slogans. This is not any kind of a leap to say, oh, this person is a Nazi. There are specific pieces of ideology that go with being a Nazi, but in this case I'm talking about, hi, I'm a Nazi, this guy says. So he's wearing an armband, he's on a metro bus, and he is threatening black people, people who look like immigrants or maybe Muslims, He is threatening people of classes that he, presumably being a Nazi, considers less than human, and thinks it's just great to deport or genocide. So he's upsetting a lot of people who are reasonably frightened of this guy. Pictures of him and notes about him rapidly get passed around Twitter, I think it was. And shortly after that, someone comes up to him at a bus stop where he's still screaming at some random black guy on the street and punches him out. Boom, flat on the sidewalk. Nobody helps him. Nobody calls an ambulance.
Nobody takes a picture of the assailant and tries to identify him.
Assailant walks away, unmolested. Eventually the police show up, so somebody apparently called them at some point. Guy is slowly rousing, refuses any assistance from the police, refuses to identify himself, takes off his armband and walks away. This is the best possible outcome. That guy, so he asked someone to help him up. The other guy said, "Fuck you," walked away.
The best possible outcome, I would argue, is someone calls the police, they show up at the next bus stop, and they arrest the guy for threatening.
Okay, that would be better.
But since that doesn't happen in our society, this is the best available outcome. He took off his armband and walked away.
And if the police had instead arrested the guy who punched him, if people had reported that guy and gotten him pursued and arrested, I would have backed his legal fund. You don't have to if you don't want to, but I would.
You know, I'm an idealist. It's one of the reasons that I take the time to come to church every Sunday. I believe that morality is important. I'm aspirational. I believe in hope. I believe that human beings can learn to treat each other better. I believe in positive reinforcement. I believe in encouraging people in doing the right thing. I also believe that there are people who listen to nothing but, "I won't let you do that. I will stop you physically if I need to." Now, I had an experience 25 years ago down in the Bay Area. I was walking down a sidewalk in Palo Alto, which is a rich liberal white enclave of supposedly very very left coast people. And I'm passing by an open air cafe, full of tables full of people. And in front of that cafe, there's a man standing there. Pretty big guy, not my size big, but 6'2", probably in his late 50s, standing there haranguing a little 10-year-old black kid. This kid's standing there sort of backed up against his bicycle. And
White guy?
White guy, yeah. White guy haranguing this little black kid, using the N-word, telling him he shouldn't be here and why doesn't he just go to hell and stuff like that. And the kid's just standing here terrified. And no one's doing anything. No one's calling the police. No one's saying, "Hey kid, come on over here, we'll take care of you." No one's telling the guy, "Shut up." They're just sitting there sipping their coffee, looking really uncomfortable. I'll give them that. They looked really uncomfortable. They were not enjoying the show.
This is that looking around to see what's normal thing.
But since nobody was jumping up and screaming at the guy and protecting the little kid, neither were they. And so we had an entire cafe of privileged, rich, white people watching someone terrorize a little black kid.
The smoke's drifting under the door. Nobody's getting up.
And so I stepped in between them, and I said, "You cannot talk to him that way." And I said to the kid, "Go on, I'll take care of this." And I said to the people in the cafe, "You in the green shirt, call 911. And you in the flowered dress, call 911. I need a police officer here." And then I turned back and I kept the guy from following the kid. He was trying to follow the kid and keep haranguing him. And I stood between them and I said, "No, I won't let you talk to that boy that way." And he said, "Then I'll punch you in the face." So I said, "You may do that and I'll win the resulting fight, but let's not go there. Let's just wait for the police to get here." 10 minutes later, the cops pulled up. I filled out a citizen's arrest form and they took the guy away to jail for the next 30 days. He was mentally ill. They were familiar with him. He was an ongoing problem. The police officer thanked me for doing the citizen's arrest because it meant they could legally keep him for 30 days, where he would be fed and housed and not hurting people. Right? I didn't punch him. And any idea why I didn't punch him?
He didn't need punching.
He didn't need punching. I could protect people without punching him. The cops showed up and arrested him so that even when I couldn't stand there anymore, he wasn't punching or threatening anyone. I happened to be 6 inches taller than he was and outweigh him 2 to 1. I had a perfectly good option. If you take one mentally ill, somewhat older guy away, and you put in 3 college students, football player sized, it's going to be a really bad idea for me to step in between them and say, you can't talk to him that way.
You can still tell someone to call 911.
Actually, what I'm thinking is, I've got a lot better odds if I sucker punch one of them. I'm not arguing it's morally right, but I'm arguing it's effective. Or what if the cops weren't going to come? You know, there are places in the country where the cops will not show up to arrest a white guy for terrorizing a black kid. Significant parts of the country where the cops just won't show up. What should I do in that case?
And arrest the victim.
What should I do in that case? I mean, again, in an ideal world, the guy would be getting proper mental health care. But in a world that isn't so ideal, what's the right thing to do? Now, I still actually wouldn't punch him because it's not going to accomplish anything. But most neo-Nazis, most people who hold Nazi ideology, most of the people wearing swastikas and marching with assault rifles aren't mentally ill. They're just believing in a sick and dangerous ideology. And I think there's a role for punching people, in stopping the spread of that ideology. Eva, what about deterrence?
Deterrence is important. Deterrence is what we're talking about, not only with discouraging that person from going out marching, threatening people again, but deterring the people watching, which is a more powerful force. If you've got a bunch of people who are like, wow, those Nazis are pretty cool, I want to hang out with those guys, they'll be my bros, and then you realize they're getting punched, you might be like, maybe I'll just go watch a football game or something. It's powerful to make there be a cost to being a Nazi or a fascist. There's a lot of overlap. They're not quite the same thing.
And what's the most effective way to make that cost happen?
I'm not sure what you're going for there.
I'm actually not making a leading question. What is the most effective way?
It depends. Sometimes it's who you vote for, and getting judges and police forces and legislators making decisions that mean it is not worth people's while to threaten and attack people because there will be legal consequences or they'll be prevented. Sometimes it means you go up and hug that guy and get him a drink and talk to him about why he's out there with all this obvious pain that he's expressing this way. Sometimes that works. It might be investing in education for people in prison, or disrupting the school-to-prison pipeline for young black males.
So ballpark for me, what percentage of the time would you say that punching someone in the face is the most effective way of discouraging people from joining the Nazis?
I'd say hardly ever, but when it's the right thing, it's a really important right thing, and it's very visible, so it's something that is part of the influence for a lot of people.
You know, in a panel discussion, it's really great when we have different opinions. I can't argue with that. What Eva just said, 100%, it is very rarely the right option, and when it is the right option, it is very important. The story about the guy punching the Nazi on the Seattle bus, I find that very inspirational.
Punched him at a bus stop.
Sorry, at a bus stop. The guy who was on the bus. I find that a very inspirational story. It's got a good narrative arc, it's got a happy ending, it's got a Nazi getting punched. I can get behind that story. It is not the most inspirational Nazi-related story that I have heard in the past few months. I have a friend who is small and female, who encountered two homeless people on the bus, one of whom was large and male and shaven-headed and wearing a swastika. And the other of whom was female, and with him, they were a couple, and not wearing a swastika and looking kind of small and scared. And my friend is Jewish. Now, the sensible thing to do when there's a big, strong, shaven-headed guy wearing a swastika on the bus is get off the bus, or at least sit very far away. My friend sits down next to the woman in the couple and starts sharing makeup tips with her about how to improve her complexion. That's inspirational. Courage is not punching a Nazi. If you're a guy like me, and you have a chance to punch a Nazi, it doesn't actually take courage to do it. It takes self-restraint not to. We're talking about fucking, gosh darned Nazis here. There's not actually courage involved in me punching a Nazi. There is a lot of courage involved in sitting down and interacting with a Nazi like a human being.
Especially if they think you're not.
Especially if they think you're not. I advocate punching Nazis in the appropriate circumstances. I don't just think it's... That was beautiful. Or the face, yes. I argue that, in fact, it is morally obligatory sometimes, in some circumstances, to punch Nazis. But I recently found myself in a discussion of punching Nazis, arguing both for the punching Nazis and for the hugging Nazis side.
There's a role for both.
And of the two, I prefer hugging Nazis. I have more respect for the black guy who ran up and hugged a white supremacist and said, "Why do you hate me, bro? Why do you hate me?" You remember the details of that one?
I know the white supremacist said, I don't know.
Yeah, he wouldn't answer it. He's like, hmm? And the guy again said, "Why do you hate me, bro? Why do you hate me?" And the white supremacist said, I don't know. That's an inspirational story there, you know? And given the choice, if we were actually having a political debate instead of an armed mob with assault rifles, I would be 100% supporting don't punch them, hug them. These are lost, broken people who are clinging desperately to a failed ideology to try to find some sense of identity and self-worth. They don't need punching, they need therapy and hugs.
So part of what this brings out, and part of one of the major points about the ethics of punching Nazis, is part of it's situational. Every situation is different. You have to consider your safety, the safety of people around you. Do you have backup? Do they have backup? Are the police going to help you, or are they going to protect, fascist oppressors? And what is going to be effective on this person in this situation, or on the onlookers in this situation? And it's going to vary. So if you're going to go and intervene in a situation where neo-Nazis are threatening people, you need to be sensitive to the context and sensitive to what you can do and what you are willing to commit to. If you're not willing to be arrested, you probably shouldn't punch a Nazi. If you don't know how to punch, you shouldn't punch a Nazi. If all the Nazis' friends are going to punch you, you might want to have second thoughts about punching a Nazi. Yeah, hit with the force of your shoulder.
Outside the knuckles. Sorry, go on.
There are a couple of books I'd like to recommend. Thank you, Patrick. This Antifa, the Anti-Fascist Handbook by Mark Bray. This goes into a lot of the history of anti-fascist movements and the current political context, guidance from members of anti-fascist organizations, past and present, and it helps sort out some of the what does Antifa mean anyway, because it can be kind of ambiguous whether we're talking about black bloc action or just we're talking about anybody who's anti-fascist. So this is a useful book for getting context and guidance. This book, Rising Up and Rising Down, Some Thoughts on Violence, Freedom, and Urgent Means by William T. Vollmann. This one is about ethics of violence and is a detailed philosophical exploration of when it's allowable or perhaps necessary to commit violence in various contexts. So if you're interested in kind of historical and practical information, you want this one. If you want the philosophical ethics side, you want this one. I recommend both. I haven't actually read both of them completely, but I've read parts of both now. And I've also got some articles that I will post on the website that I found very valuable, both about kind of how to think about all this and about specific incidents and how they've turned out recently of people responding either violently or non-violently to neo-Nazi action.
By the way, one thing I want to emphasize here, I do advocate in some situations punching Nazis. I also advocate staying and talking to the police. In Seattle. There are parts of the country where I advocate punching the Nazi and getting them out of Dodge. But in Seattle, Dodge for instance, yeah. But in Seattle, we actually have a reasonably moderate police force and a very liberal judiciary. And so for me, the question, am I willing to stay and talk to the cops, is a really good guideline for whether I am protecting people or punching someone because punching someone is a jerk is fun, right? If I'm not willing to stay and talk to the cops, then I probably don't actually think I'm doing the right thing. I think I'm doing the satisfying thing.
Which would not be the case in a place where the police would definitely be on the side of racist oppressors.
Yeah.
So these calculuses shift depending on all the pieces of the circumstances.
But I want to be clear there, the question is not, is it more or less right in Seattle than in the Deep South? The question is it a good guideline for ethicality in Seattle or in the Deep South? Our laws as written are actually pretty much in favor of punching someone who's threatening other people. Self-defense includes defense of others legally. And if someone is saying, I should just kill you, it is actually legal, according to what's written in the books, to punch them, to stop them. You don't have to wait until they initiate physical violence if they are actively threatening you or someone else.
But what is legal is subject to how that's enforced and how judges decide.
The laws as written are not the same as the laws as enforced. And so if I'm in a place where the laws are enforced roughly as written, like Seattle, then will I go to jail for this is actually a pretty good guideline for whether it's a good idea. In places where that's not the case, where the government is corrupt and not enforcing those laws if the aggressor is white, for example, don't use that as your guideline.
And the equation would be very different if you were black, for instance. Mm-hmm. You are in a position of power in a number of ways. You have the privilege of maleness, white skin, being very large. So you have more options, which places a certain amount of burden on you to use that privilege appropriately and morally. Someone who is in a more vulnerable position, it makes more sense for them to just get out.
That being said,
doesn't mean they couldn't also be the hero, but it's totally understandable if they want to just run.
I actually get to punch Nazis much less often than most people. Because
they don't tell them they're Nazis.
That too. But it's like, where does the 500-pound gorilla sit anywhere he wants to? What do you call a 500-pound gorilla who wants your seat, sir? Right? When the 400-pound, 6'8" man in the rainbow sarong comes up and says, hi, you don't go, I'm a Nazi and I think gay people should die. But the other thing is, the most effective way that I have ever found to intervene in a potential domestic violence or physical confrontation situation is to walk up with a smile on my face and my hands at my sides, open palms toward them, visibly harmless, and go, hey guys, can I help with something? It's amazing how that quiets down a fight when you're white and 6'8" and male.
Sometimes sometimes it can if you are a small woman of color too. Depends on the context.
But it's a lot harder. So I don't advocate punching Nazis when there is any other effective option. To be clear, I think punching someone is a last resort. I just think it's an important resort when there aren't better options.
So I think we've said pretty much what we need to say in the presentation part of this, and we should turn this to discussion.
As a panel, traditionally we do take a few questions from the audience. Does anybody have any questions you'd like us to discuss or consider as a panel? Go ahead.
I guess you were talking about extinguishing ideologies. And I understand where that comes from, but I mean, you know, we as a large group kind of all agree we're mostly liberal. But there's a lot of other people that would be like on the conservative end, or that would say that our ideology should be extinguished, and they should do any means to extinguish it. I get why genocide is bad, clearly, but when we're talking about extinguishing an ideology, it kind of like gives me goosebumps to think that we're talking about that in context.
So the question is, you know, when we talk about extinguishing an ideology, well, we have ideologies too, and there are people who would like to extinguish our ideology. Is it really a good idea to be trying to extinguish ideologies in a world where there are people who want to extinguish ours? Eva?
The thing is, I'm not trying to extinguish an ideology. I know I'm never going to extinguish Nazism. There will always be people out there who strongly believe that people of individual racial strains have a native right to own their land and kick everyone else out, and that their particular race is better than all the others. That's the essence of Nazism, and that's what I'm opposing. And if people believe that, I can't stop them, but I can stop them from shouting that's true in people's faces.
I'm actually not so interested in stopping them shouting it. It's in stopping them shouting it while carrying automatic weapons. One of the things that really worries me about the intersection between the neo-Nazi far right and the open carry laws is that before open carry, it was illegal to walk down the street with an assault rifle shouting about genocide. And now...
That's a point we were talking about this morning. When you espouse open carry and push free speech to the point of even shouting threats, then you have removed the space of safety between immediate threat for your life and everything is fine. There's no longer a gap between, oh, this person is walking down the street with an assault rifle screaming threats, and oh, now he's shooting people. That shift is a momentary one. It's instantaneous.
It's about a quarter inch, actually.
Mm-hmm. There's no point at which police, for instance, can go, now there's a threat and we should move in. I think that open carry is a mistake, partly for that reason, and allowing free speech to include hate speech is a bad mistake.
But I want to actually address the specific question. Isn't it the case that everything we're saying about silencing them could be applied to silencing us? And I'm going to encourage you to Google "Tolerance is not a moral virtue." It's an article about the philosophical nature of tolerance. Liberals believe in tolerance. We believe that people should live and let live. We believe that people should not be harassed or beaten up for who they love or what they believe, etc. And yet some of us also believe in stopping Nazis, including using physical force. And the reason is that, according to this article and according to my belief, tolerance is not a moral virtue. Tolerance is a social compact. Tolerance is a ceasefire. I won't beat you up for saying that poor people deserve to starve, and you won't beat me up for saying that hospitals are obligated to provide preventative care. We disagree about something really fundamental and profound, and we can talk about it. We can talk about whether it's better to house homeless people or whether it's better to let them understand their moral weakness of being on the street, right? I mean, you're wrong, but we can talk about it. But if someone chooses to violate that ceasefire, if they say, well, thank you for tolerating my belief that all Jews should be shot, then we are not obligated to extend our tolerance to them, because it's not a unilateral obligation. It's not an intrinsic moral good. It's an agreement. And if you choose to breach that agreement, if you choose to not tolerate people and instead you're going to beat them up or kill them, then we don't live in a tolerance world anymore, because you've broken the ceasefire. Now we live in a world which you have chosen, where we don't tolerate people. We stop them by any means necessary. This is what's at the root of when the fascists go away, the anti-fascists go home and play Pokemon and smoke dope. Anti-fascists don't want to find people to beat up. They want to stop the beating. Once the beating stops, look, morale has improved. All right? And the anti-fascists go home and start enjoying the fun things in life, like pot and video games. Right? The fascists, their idea of a fun Saturday is marching down the street with assault rifles threatening to kill people. There's no reason to tolerate that. Tolerance isn't the issue. Keeping people from getting shot with assault rifles is the issue. Good question, by the way. Yes?
Just on those lines, by the way, I had a sign on my desk in grad school, the floggings will continue until morale improves.
That's what I was referencing, yep.
I mean, what is legal and what is illegal? Because the racism of the old KKK was clearly hang the blacks, kill the Jews. But now it appears to be dog whistle racism. They're not walking around saying kill the blacks. So, you know, you have to be a bit careful. I feel you're extrapolating. I mean, they want to do that, but they're not articulating that, you know. So, you know, in there, I'm not, you know, defending them, but I'm saying they can come up with a defense saying, hey, this is legal, what we're saying. We're not saying kill the blacks. So how is it then legal punching them if they are entitled to say that?
That's a really great question. So the question is, back when we were dealing with the KKK lynching people on a regular basis, it was very clear by their actions and their words that they were murderous terrorists. It's less clear when what they're doing is throwing gasoline on people while marching with tiki torches and shouting blood and soil. Actually, it's not that much less clear. If you look at what happened in Charlottesville, the marchers the night before threw gasoline on a man in a wheelchair while they were marching carrying burning torches. That is actually attempted murder.
They barred people into a synagogue while carrying torches and shouting blood and soil.
For those who don't know, blood and soil is one of the original Nazi Germany slogans. So if you are marching and shouting blood and soil, you are identifying yourself to me as a Nazi. Thank you for letting me know. So it's true that generally the alt-right is not murdering people at the same rate as the lynchings in the South. They're leaving that up to the police.
And not everyone in the alt-right is a straight-up Nazi.
That's true too. But the people who are marching in places like Charlottesville actually are making credible immediate threats to people's lives. And that's actionable. In fact, that's something that I believe we are morally obligated to act against.
Is it illegal having a swastika?
It is not in
in
America
the US.
illegal.
It is in Germany.
In America, it is not illegal to wear a swastika. In Germany, it is illegal to wear a swastika. And by the way, I don't claim that everyone who wears a swastika is a Nazi. If I see someone walking down the street wearing a swastika, they might be a misguided 16-year-old who thinks it's cool. There was a punk band that...
The Ramones.
The Ramones, I couldn't remember them. The Ramones, at one point, started putting swastikas on their touring gear. And their fans went, "What are you doing, you sick Nazis?" And they went, "Oh, sorry, we got that wrong."
Some of them are Jewish, by the way.
Yeah.
Some of the Ramones.
Some of the Ramones who are Jewish were still using swastikas as this punk rebellion
It was a shock thing.
And their fans said, "No way in hell, get that crap off your gear." And they listened and did. Because they had just been doing it to be cool and rebellious and punk. But when I see someone with a swastika shouting at a black man, I am really good with assuming that person is a Nazi.
Swastika is also a reversed Hindu symbol of infinity.
It is.
But if it's a if it's a swastika as presented in the German
Black and red and white, etc.
presentation, there's
Very
no
distinctive.
confusion.
Oh, can I say one more thing?
Yeah.
I have seen a beautiful piece of subversive graffiti that I want to share with you. So swastikas are one of the most common pieces of graffiti that you find scratched into bathroom walls with a key or whatever, because it's a really simple shape to make, it's all straight lines. And what the person had done was someone had left a swastika on the bathroom wall, and they'd completed it as a box and written L-O-V-E in the 4 squares. And I thought that was the perfect thing to do to a swastika. You know, sure, you can spew your racist hatred everywhere. I won't scribble it out. I'm going to turn it into a symbol that says love. So anyone who runs into a swastika, grab your Sharpie, complete the square, and write love. Problem solved.
I've seen other presentations too, turning it into a little running figure or a mosquito or any number of things that you can turn this symbol diagram.
So you're going to say something.
As far as the Ramones go, there was a very serious racist skinhead issue in the punk and rock movements in like the 80s and 90s. And that's where one of the recent Antifa movements came from, was anarchist punks countering the racists in their presence. And it was very effective. They hit them and they didn't come back.
Well, I want to say, I think the most, actually, I'm going to say this and I'm going to just wrap this up, I think. One of the most effective, in terms of good for the liberal side, good for freedom and justice and tolerance, one of the most effective pieces of political violence in the last several years was the murderer who ran the protester over in Charlottesville. Because a lot of people look at a troop of armed men in camo with assault rifles walking down the street, and they think, wow, those guys look so brave and impressive. Those guys are so tough and manly. I want to be like those guys. This is great. I think this whole neo-Nazi thing is awesome. And then someone dies because of it. And people are like, well, I don't want to be associated with that guy. He murdered someone. I think that, yes, it was a horrible thing to have happen. The guy's a murderer, and he's going to go to jail for it for a very long time, hopefully for life. I think that cost the neo-Nazi movement a lot of members. Because it's not fun anymore.
Not yet, dude. We're not supposed to kill them yet.
Thank you. Yeah, it's not fun to identify with a movement that murdered someone. It takes it out of the realm of cosplay and into the realm of just got real, right? So the other thing I want to advocate is not making martyrs. If I walk up to a peaceful Nazi march, there is such a thing, they don't have weapons and they're marching with a proper permit between police lines that are keeping them away from people. If I walk up to a peaceful Nazi march and start shooting, that is not an act of liberal politics. That is an act of murder, and it's going to really help Nazi recruitment. Right? No one's going to want to identify with those murderous Antifa, right? So for me, the right time to punch a Nazi is when I am clearly protecting someone. When I am clearly defending someone, that is a great time to punch a Nazi. And the trouble happens when things like open carry make the immediacy of the threat indistinguishable from business as usual. Let's save any other questions for the discussion period, because we're running really long for the panel part.
Well, I'd like to make more statements.
I'm sorry, we're going to leave it for the discussion part? Yeah, so feel free to bring it up in the
Let's
discussion
switch to
part.
the discussion.
Eva, closing statement?
I think I kind of already made it.
Okay, yeah.
There's a time and a place for punching Nazis.
Make sure it's the right time and place. Don't do it thoughtlessly. Violence is a last resort. But think about whether there are times that the right thing to do is to defend someone with force against force. Thanks, everyone.